The Galactic Medical Academy of Cent 7 prided itself on being the most prestigious medical institution in the third spiral arm. Its delicate crystalline spires housed the finest minds in xenobiology. Its research labs produced groundbreaking studies in cellular regeneration, and its graduates went on to become chief medical officers on the most advanced ships in the galaxy, which made the arrival of Dr. Sarah Chen all the more controversial. The human stood before the assembled faculty, her stocky frame and dense muscle mass marking her immediately as a Deathworlder. Dean Vixtel's sensory filaments wavered slightly as he made the announcement. Distinguished colleagues, as part of our new exchange program with Earth's medical institutions, Dr. Chen will be teaching advanced emergency response techniques this semester. The gathered alien professors murmured politely, though their color-shifting skin betrayed their unease. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as resilient and innovative, but also as recklessly aggressive. Their medical techniques often seemed more like battlefield surgery than healing arts. Dr. Chen's first class was scheduled for the following morning. The amphitheater was filled with final-year medical students, their varied anatomies all oriented toward the teaching floor with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Most had never seen a human in person before. Your bodies, Dr. Chen began without preamble, are incredibly fragile compared to mine. This isn't an insult. It's a medical fact we need to acknowledge. What might be a minor injury for me could be lethal for you, which is exactly why you need to learn human emergency response techniques. The students shifted uncomfortably. A Meridian student raised their primary appendage. But Professor, our traditional methods emphasize gentle manipulation and gradual stabilization. The vids we've seen of human first aid appear violent. Chen smiled. Sometimes being gentle kills. Watch this. She activated a holographic projection, showing the human performing chest compressions on an accident victim. The alien students recoiled in horror at what appeared to be repeated assault on an injured person. What you're seeing isn't violence, it's calculated force applied to restart a heart. Yes, ribs might crack. Yes, it looks brutal. But it works. And today, you're going to learn how to modify this technique for 17 different species. The rest of the class was a blur of demonstrations that challenged everything the students thought they knew about emergency care. They learned about tourniquets, pressure points, and the controversial human practice of improvisational medical tools, using whatever was available to save a life. But that's not sterile, protested a vegetarian student when Chen demonstrated how to make an emergency pressure bandage from a torn shirt. Neither is bleeding to death, Chen countered. Perfect is the enemy of good enough when you're trying to keep someone alive. Sometimes the difference between life and death is your willingness to get your hands dirty. By the end of the class, several students had needed to take breaks to compose themselves, and one had actually fainted at the demonstration of field cauterization techniques. But as they filed out, there was a new light in their eyes, the beginning of understanding that sometimes the most effective solutions weren't the most elegant ones. Chen watched them leave, making notes on her tablet. The real challenge would begin tomorrow, when they started practical exercises. These students had the knowledge, but knowledge wasn't enough in an emergency. They needed to develop the initiative, the quick thinking, and most importantly, the courage to take decisive action when lives were at stake. As she packed up her teaching materials, Dean Vixtel drifted into the room, his sensory filaments now a deep purple of concern. Dr. Chen, I've received several complaints about today's class. The students found it distressing. Good, Chen replied, not looking up from her tablet. Medicine isn't always comfortable, Dean. Neither is saving lives. Better they be distressed in my classroom than paralyzed with indecision during a real emergency. The dean's filaments rippled with uncertainty, but he couldn't argue with her logic. The galaxy was changing, becoming more dangerous and unpredictable. Perhaps it was time for medical education to change as well. Little did any of them know just how soon those lessons would be put to the test. 2 weeks into Dr. Chen's emergency response course, the Galactic Medical Academy's simulation lab hummed with nervous energy. Today's practical exercise involved responding to multiple casualties in a shipboard accident scenario. The students had been divided into response teams, each equipped with both traditional alien medical tools and the crude but effective human emergency supplies Chen had insisted on including. Zixka, a promising Etherian student whose translucent body pulsed with anxiety, led the first team. Their floating tentacles wrapped nervously around a human-style trauma kit as Chen explained the scenario. Ship's engine room, plasma containment breach, multiple victims with varying degrees of burns and trauma. Your emergency shields are failing. You have 8 minutes before radiation levels become lethal. Go. The simulation began, holographic victims materializing across the lab. Some screamed, others lay unconscious, their various alien anatomies displaying horrific injuries. The student teams froze, overwhelmed by the chaos. Move. Chen's voice cracked like a whip. Triage. Remember your protocols. Zixka's team finally sprang into action, floating toward the nearest victim, a Meridian engineer with severe plasma burns across their primary appendages. They reached for their traditional healing resonator, but Chen's voice interrupted them. The resonator takes 4 minutes to calibrate. Your victim has 2 minutes before shock sets in. What else can you use? Zixka hesitated, then reached for the human burn kit. The cognitive dissonance was almost painful. Everything about their training screamed that slathering chemical gels on such delicate tissues was barbaric. But they remembered Chen's words. Perfect is the enemy of good enough. Across the lab, other teams grappled with similar decisions. A Velitarian student actually used a piece of debris as a splint, something that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. A quantum collective consciousness interfaced directly with a human automated defibrillator, adapting its shocking pulses for xenobiological use. Then reality intruded on their practice. The explosion rocked the entire building. Not a simulation. Real. The lab's eastern wall cracked, crystalline fragments raining down as emergency containment fields flickered to life. Through the breach, they could see one of the Academy's experimental medical labs burning. This is not a drill. Chen's voice cut through the panic. Real casualties incoming. Everything we've practiced. This is where it matters. The first victims stumbled through the breach. Researchers caught in whatever experiment had gone wrong. Their injuries were horrifyingly similar to the simulation scenarios, but now the blood and burns were real. Zixka moved without thinking, their tentacles already reaching for the burn kit. Other students followed suit, their recent training overriding their instinctive revulsion at human methods. They worked with desperate efficiency, applying tourniquets, pressure bandages, and emergency medications. Chen moved among them, supervising and assisting, but mostly letting them work. She noted with pride how they adapted human techniques to alien physiologies on the fly. A quantum collective used their processing power to calculate precise pressure points for 17 different species. A Velitarian student improvised an oxygen delivery system from damaged lab equipment. "Professor," Zixka called out, "the traditional protocols say we should wait for the specialized trauma team. But how long until they arrive?" Chen asked, already knowing the answer. 12 minutes. "And how long does your patient have?" Zixka's tentacles rippled with determination. Not 12 minutes. They turned to their team. "Prepare for emergency transport. We're moving them to the trauma center ourselves." Chen watched as her students coordinated the evacuation, using makeshift stretchers and modified gravity platforms. They worked with a confidence that would have seemed impossible just weeks ago. The barbaric human methods were saving lives before their eyes. Hours later, as the last patients were stabilized and the emergency response teams from the city finally arrived, Dean Vixstall found Chen documenting the incident. Remarkable. The dean's filaments glowed with an emotion Chen couldn't quite read. Every single patient survived. Even the ones our traditional protocols would have. "Well, they're good students," Chen replied. They just needed to learn that sometimes the most effective solution isn't the most comfortable one. The medical board will want a full report, Vikstall continued. This incident will change a lot of minds about human emergency response techniques. Chen nodded, remembering the determination she'd seen in her students' eyes. They'd crossed a threshold today, and there would be no going back. The Galaxy's medical practice was about to change, one emergency at a time. The success of Dr. Chen's students during the laboratory accident had sent shockwaves through the medical community. Within days, the Galactic Medical Council had convened an emergency session to address the concerning development of human emergency response techniques being taught to impressionable students. Dr. Chen stood before the council's semicircle of illuminated pods, each containing a representative from a major medical tradition in the galaxy. Her students packed the observation gallery, their various anatomies tense with anticipation. Dean Vikstall hovered nervously at the periphery, his sensory filaments cycling through anxious color patterns. Dr. Chen, began High Counselor Ethera, her crystalline form refracting light in patterns of disapproval. Your methods violate thousand-year-old principles of medical care. The recordings from the accident response show your students performing procedures that our medical simulators classify as assault. With respect, Counselor, Chen replied. Those same assaults saved 27 lives that day, lives that would have been lost waiting for proper procedures. A ripple of protest moved through the council. A Quantum Collective representative spoke next, their voice a synchronized chorus of disapproval. Our simulations indicate that traditional methods would have resulted in only a 43% mortality rate. Only. Chen's voice carried an edge that made several council members recoil. Those aren't numbers, Counselor. Those are people. Parents, children, colleagues. And your acceptable losses approach is exactly why human emergency medicine evolved the way it did. She gestured to a holoscreen, which sprang to life showing historical footage from Earth. Humans developed these techniques because we had to, because waiting for perfect conditions meant death, because sometimes you have to choose between looking civilized and saving lives. The footage showed human paramedics working in disaster zones, makeshift field hospitals, accident scenes. The council watched in horror as bones were set without ceremony, wounds cauterized with improvised tools, chest compressions performed with seemingly brutal force. This is barbarism, declared a Meridian counselor, their primary appendages writhing in distress. This is survival, Chen countered. She turned to her students. Zixka, tell them about the Meridian researcher you treated during the accident. The Aetherian student floated forward, their tentacles steady with newfound confidence. The patient had fourth-degree plasma burns across 60% of their primary appendages. Traditional protocol would have required a sterile environment and proper resonance calibration. Instead, we used human burn gel and pressure bandages. The patient retained full functionality of their appendages. Under traditional methods, they would have lost them entirely. More students came forward, each with similar stories. A Velitarian described saving a quantum consciousness by using improvised electrical grounding. A crystalline detailed how human-style splinting techniques had preserved a fellow student's growth matrix after a severe fracture. The council listened, their disapproval gradually giving way to uncertainty. Chen pressed her advantage. I propose a demonstration. Let us set up 2 emergency response scenarios. One team using traditional methods, one using human techniques. Let the results speak for themselves. The council chambers erupted in discussion. Finally, High Counselor Ethera spoke. We accept your challenge, Dr. Chen. But be warned, if your methods prove more dangerous or less effective than traditional approaches, you will be barred from teaching in any medical institution in council space. And if we prove more effective? Chen asked. Then, the High Counselor's crystalline form sparkled with reluctant admission. We will have to reconsider our emergency response protocols across all council territories. The demonstration was scheduled for the following day in the Academy's largest simulation chamber. News of the challenge had spread, and medical professionals from across the sector had arrived to witness it. The stakes couldn't have been higher. The future of emergency medical care in the galaxy hung in the balance. As Chen prepared her team, Dean Vixtal approached, his filaments a complex swirl of worry and hope. "Dr. Chen, are you certain about this? The Council has appointed master healers from 3 different traditions to compete against your students." Chen watched her students checking their emergency kits, their movements confident and precise. "Dean, do you know why human emergency medicine seems so brutal to other species?" "I assume because humans evolved on a death world." "Partly. But mainly it's because we learned something vital early in our medical history." She turned to face him fully. "In an emergency, the enemy isn't pain or discomfort or even the injury itself. The enemy is time. And tomorrow, we're going to prove that to everyone." The Academy's simulation chamber had been transformed into a disaster zone. A simulated ship crash scene sprawled across the vast space, complete with burning wreckage, hazardous material spills, and dozens of highly sophisticated medical dummies representing various species with life-threatening injuries. 2 teams stood ready at opposite ends of the chamber. On one side, 3 master healers, a crystalline life shaper, a quantum collective medical matrix, and a meridian bioharmonist, surrounded by their traditional arrays of delicate instruments and healing devices. On the other, Dr. Chen's students, led by Zixka, equipped with their hybrid kits of human emergency supplies and modified alien tech. High Counselor Ethra's voice resonated through the chamber. The scenario: a passenger vessel crash with multiple casualties. Environmental hazards include radiation, toxic fumes, and structural instability. You have 20 minutes before the site becomes completely inaccessible. Your goal is to save as many lives as possible. Begin." The master healers moved with practiced grace, their traditional methods beautiful to watch. The crystalline life shaper began creating perfect crystalline containment fields around the most critically injured victims. The quantum collective initiated complex diagnostic sequences. The meridian bioharmonist started calibrating their resonance instruments. Chen's team exploded into action like a well-oiled machine. Zixka's tentacles whipped through the air as they called out, "Triage teams, mark and move. Red tags first, stabilize in the safe zone. Engineering team, secure that coolant leak before it reaches the victims." The contrast between the 2 approaches couldn't have been starker. The master healers worked with precision and patience, each movement perfectly calculated. Chen's students seemed almost chaotic in comparison, rushing from victim to victim, using quick and dirty solutions that made the watching medical professionals wince. 10 minutes in, the difference in results became apparent. The master healers had perfectly stabilized 3 patients. Chen's teams had moved 15 victims to safety, using improvised stretchers and emergency treatment that prioritized speed over comfort. Radiation levels rising. Called out the simulation controller. 10 minutes remaining. The quantum collective paused their detailed neural scan. "This is insufficient time for proper procedure. Then adapt." Chen shouted from the observation platform. "What's the point of perfect procedure if your patient dies waiting for it?" Something shifted in the chamber's atmosphere. The master healers looked at their remaining patients, then at Chen's team still racing against time. The crystalline life shaper made a decision. "Request assistance," they called out, their perfect crystalline form dimming slightly in what might have been embarrassment. Without hesitation, Zixka dispatched 2 teams to help the master healers evacuate their patients. "Show them the quick splint technique," they called out, "and get those emergency stasis patches ready." What followed was a remarkable fusion of approaches. The master healer's precise knowledge combined with human emergency techniques created something entirely new. The quantum collective adapted their processing power to run simplified but effective diagnostic suites. The meridian bioharmonist learned to perform basic resonance healing while on the move. As the final seconds ticked down, the last victim was rushed to safety. The chamber's hazard warnings reached critical levels just as the teams cleared the danger zone. Silence fell as High Counselor Ethera floated to the center of the observation platform. The medical dummies' diagnostic systems uploaded their final status reports to the main display. Final results, Ethera announced, her crystalline form refracting light in complex patterns. Traditional methods team. 8 patients fully stabilized, perfect recovery projected. Human emergency response team. 27 patients stabilized, varying degrees of recovery projected. But she paused significantly, all expected to survive. The chamber erupted in discussion. Chen's students clustered together, exhausted but proud. The master healers approached them, their earlier disdain replaced by thoughtful consideration. The crystalline life shaper addressed Zixka directly. Your methods lack elegance, they said, but we cannot argue with the results. Perhaps there is room for both approaches in our medical tradition. Dean Vixtel's filaments had turned a bright gold of excitement. Dr. Chen, do you realize what this means? The council will have to. A piercing alarm cut through the chamber. Not a simulation this time. The Academy's emergency broadcast system activated. Multiple vehicle collision at the Maglev transit station. Mass casualties. All available medical personnel report immediately. Chen watched as both her students and the master healers turned to her, waiting for direction. She smiled. Well, she said, who's ready to put theory into practice? The Maglev transit station was chaos incarnate. 2 passenger cars had collided at high speed, their quantum stabilizers failing catastrophically. The wreckage sprawled across 3 levels of the station, with injured passengers of various species trapped in precarious positions throughout the twisted metal and shattered crystal structure. Dr. Chen's teams arrived simultaneously with the master healers, all previous rivalry forgotten in the face of real disaster. Chen quickly assessed the scene, her human eyes picking out structural dangers that the alien medical teams might miss. Zixka, coordinate with the crystalline life shaper. We need containment fields around those fuel leaks, but don't wait for perfect crystalline formation. Quick set barriers will do. She turned to the quantum collective. Can you interface with the station's systems? We need to know where everyone is trapped. The quantum collective's voice harmonics showed none of their earlier disdain for human methods. Accessing now. 28 life signs detected. Multiple species, 12 critical. The Meridian bioharmonist floated forward. Our traditional triage would take too long. How do we proceed? Human style. Chen smiled grimly. We combine approaches. Your resonance scanning can identify internal injuries faster than our tools. Use that, but don't wait to begin treatment. Mark them. Red for immediate evac, yellow for urgent, green for walking wounded. Zixka, show them our color coding system. What followed was a masterclass in emergency response. Human efficiency merged with alien precision. The crystalline life shaper created quick-form crystal supports that Chen's students reinforced with emergency bracing. The quantum collective ran rapid diagnostic suites, while Velutarian students applied emergency first aid. The Meridian bioharmonists' healing resonances were amplified through improvised human medical equipment. Critical patient. Zixka called out. Crystalline species, major fractures throughout their matrix. The crystalline life shaper moved to begin their traditional healing ritual, but Chen interrupted. No time. Their core matrix is destabilizing. But the proper procedure will take 30 minutes they don't have. Chen pulled out a device from her kit. Emergency matrix stabilizer. Human designed, tested on crystalline species. Not elegant, but it will hold them together until we can get them to a proper facility. The life shaper hesitated only a moment before nodding. Together, they applied the stabilizer. The patient's matrix stopped deteriorating immediately. Similar scenes played out across the accident site. Traditional alien medical knowledge combined with human emergency innovations in ways nobody had thought possible. The quantum collective discovered their processing power could run simplified versions of 40 different emergency protocols simultaneously. The Meridian bioharmonist found that their healing resonances, when focused through human-designed emergency amplifiers, could stabilize multiple patients at once. Hours passed in a blur of activity. Finally, the last patient was evacuated. The medical teams, both human-trained and traditional, gathered in the emergency triage center they'd established. High Counselor Ethera arrived to inspect the operation. Her crystalline form glowed with surprise as she reviewed the casualty reports. 28 victims, 28 survivors, no permanent disabilities recorded. This is unprecedented. The quantum collective's voice harmonics carried a new tone of respect. Analysis indicates the combination of human emergency techniques with our traditional methods improved survival rates by 47% over either approach alone. More than that, the crystalline life shaper added, we discovered new applications for our traditional techniques. The quick-form crystal supports. We never considered using our abilities in such a way. Chen watched her students mingling with the master healers, exchanging techniques and ideas. Zixka was demonstrating emergency splinting to a group of traditional healers, while a Meridian Master showed students how to fine-tune their resonance equipment for faster deployment. Dean Vixtal approached, his sensory filaments glowing with pride. The Council has reached a decision, Dr. Chen. Your emergency response techniques will be incorporated into the standard medical curriculum across all Council space. With modifications, Chen added, watching the continued exchange of ideas. What we saw today wasn't just human techniques or traditional alien medicine. It was something new, something better. The Dean's filaments shifted to a color Chen had never seen before. The Council is also establishing a new department at the Academy. The Department of Emergency Medical Innovation. They want you to lead it. Chen looked around at the mixture of human and alien medical techniques that had saved so many lives today. On one condition, she said, we staff it with both human and traditional practitioners. Today proved that we're all stronger together. As she watched her students and the master healers continue to exchange knowledge, Chen reflected on how far they'd come. What had started as a controversial teaching assignment had evolved into something revolutionary. The galaxy's medical practice would never be the same, and countless lives would be saved because students had dared to challenge tradition and master healers had dared to embrace change. In the end, it wasn't about human methods being better than alien ones or tradition giving way to innovation. It was about finding the best way to achieve what all medical practitioners, human or alien, ultimately wanted: saving lives by any means necessary.